The eighth intent, shine your light. I am a magnificent being, awakening to my highest potential. I express myself with joy, smiling easily and laughing often. I shine my light.
I don't know about you, but it seems to me like as long as I've got a body here on planet Earth, that one of the things that is my reference point is to just be as happy as I can, as much of the time as I can. I don't think I'm missing anything here. I think that's the idea of life, is to cultivate our joy and to create as much joy for ourselves as we can, as much of the time as possible, and to stay in that joy and not allow anything to come between us and our joy. Now, some of this came home to me when I first left my beautiful Hawaiian home and ended up in Napa, California. And I had made an intention when I left the mainland that I meet some of the premier messengers and channels and light workers in the areas that I traveled through because I'd gotten spoiled. I'd been with Tina and Lee Ching and Betsy and Mother Mary, and we had so many people in the early intenders whose higher selves began to blossom that I'd become a little spoiled. So when I got to Napa, California, it wasn't but a couple weeks that I met a young man, and his name was Jason Starks. And Jason is a wonderful channel who at that time was living in the Sonoma, California area. Every Wednesday night he would hold a session where about 20 of us would gather to hear him bring through a group of entities that he simply called the Nine. I never figured out who the Nine were, but their messages were so insightful that I kept coming back week after week for about 4 months to hear what the Nine had to say. And Jason himself was about as charismatic as it gets. He was probably at that time in his mid-30s or so, with a smile that just lit up the whole room. Just attracted to this man, and he and I became good friends over this 4-month period that I was living there. And toward the end of my stay, I knew I was going to be moving on to the Albuquerque area. I had a couple weeks more before moving. Jason happened to make an announcement to the group of people that were meeting there, and he told us that he was going to be holding a workshop some 2 weeks hence, and the subject of the workshop was abundance. And he invited us all to attend. And immediately my mind went to work on why I couldn't make it. You know, the ego can get real ugly sometimes. The first egotistical resistance was this little voice went off in my head that said, well, God, why do you want to go to somebody else's workshops? You're giving workshops of your own. Again, the ego can get real strange sometimes. The second resistance was financial. Jason's workshops were $220, and I had about 20 in my pocket at the time, and I figured I'm just not going to make it. So sure enough, 2 weeks later, came to the last session with the Nine, and after it was all over and we were walking out of the room, Jason pulls me aside and he says two things to me that blew my two resistances out of the water. The first one, which sort of took care of the ego's resistance, he says this to me: the teachers need the teachers. The teachers need the teachers, and I knew he was right. Because where would I have ever gotten without Tina and BJ and Vicky and all those who'd helped me along the way? I knew he was right. We need each other. The teachers need the teachers. The second thing he said, oh, by the way, Tony, he said, if money's an issue, he said, you can pay me later, don't pay me at all, just come. The following Saturday morning, I'm driving to Rohnert Park, California, where I come to a beautiful house there, where about 35 people are sitting around the floor on these big Zabuton pillows, and Jason gives about a 20-minute introduction to the subject of abundance, and then he point blank singles me out, and he says, Tony, he says, what is it you think is keeping you from your abundance? And I said, Jason, I don't have the slightest idea. That's why I'm here. And then he asks me the strangest question. He says, what did your paternal grandmother really want to do with her life? I'm wondering, where is he going with this? And I didn't even really know my grandmother very well. I'd met her one time when I grew up in southern Illinois. My father was a small-town doctor in central Illinois. And when I was 6 years old, he drove me and my mother all the way across country to San Leandro, California to meet my grandparents. And the only thing I remember about my grandmother is that while we were there, she played the piano like a dream. She played it several times, and it was just beautiful. She was a woman of under 5 feet tall who had to put a pillow on the piano bench to get up to the keys. And I asked my mother later on, when I got a little bit older, about my grandmother. And my mother told me that my grandmother had aspirations of being a great concert pianist, that she had the skills, the enthusiasm, the drive, the talent, the whole package. And yet when she met my grandfather, who was sort of a hardened, domineering man, he wanted her to go to work in the family furniture business, first in Chicago and then in San Leandro. And then fortunately for me, she began to have children. And her dreams of becoming a great concert pianist got put on the back burner because someone else, namely my grandfather, had other agendas for her. Yeah. And as I'm telling this story, the 35 people sitting on the Zabuton pillows now are quiet because it's a sad account of a life not lived to its fullest. And then Jason asks me this. He says, what did your father really want to do with his life? What made his heart sing? And well, I knew my father a lot better than I knew my grandmother because I grew up with him. And I remember asking him that when I was a kid. Dad, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? And he said, a tennis pro. Said he dearly loved the game of tennis and that he lettered in college in tennis and he thought he could go on to be in a country club or to be on the circuit. He didn't know. But he didn't get to do that because his mother, my grandmother, had other plans for him. She wanted him to be a doctor at all costs. And all the years of schooling and residencies and internships and all that took over while his dreams of being a tennis pro got put on the back burner. And as I'm telling the story, the 35 people on the pillows are even quieter because here's a second account right in my own family line of unrealized dreams. And then Jason begins to explain a little bit. And he says that my grandmother, because she was not able to live out her dreams of being a concert pianist, that she transferred her dreams of success to her eldest son, my father. Wanted him to be a doctor so that she could live out her dreams of success through him, vicariously through him, but by her standards. And then Jason asks me this. He says, Tony, what is it that you really want to do with your life? What makes your heart sing? And I said, well, that's easy. I remember saying I want and switching it to I intend. And I said, I intend that I am giving talks and writing books that are helping people in their lives. And I said, I intend that I'm doing my best to make Mother Earth a cleaner, safer, more beautiful place for all of us to live. And I also said, I intend that I experience oneness with God in this lifetime and ascend. And Jason says, you can have it. He says, you can have it all. He said, but first you've got to cut the threads between you and your family line, your ancestral lineage, because this hasn't been going on just back from your grandmother and your father who didn't get to do what they really wanted to do. It's been going on for centuries and eons back in your family line, and nobody in your family line has ever got to do what they wanted to do because someone else always had an agenda for them. And he said, Tony, you are the seventh son of the seventh son. And it is up to you to do what you really love to do, regardless of what anybody else has to say to you. And as he's telling me this, the 35 people sitting on the Zabuton pillow, you could have heard a pin drop because they were figuring out, well, perhaps what you're figuring out right now, that we are all the seventh sons and seventh daughters of the seventh sons and daughters. And it is up to us in this lifetime to cut the threads between us and our ancestral lineage, to cut the threads between us and anyone else who has an agenda for us, and to grasp a hold of our freedom and nurture it and cherish it for the gift that it truly is. So now I ask you, as we move in toward the ninth intent, where we share our visions of our ideal world, what is it that makes your heart sing? Because just like BJ told me back in the rainforests in the 70s in Kona, he said, you can have it. You can have it all. You've just got to believe that you can.